Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Robin Garrell. I'm the president of the CUNY Graduate Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's public conversation. Since 2007, the Leon Levy Center for Biography has elevated the art and craft of biography through events like this one, and through fellowships for working biographers. Readers and writers alike have benefited. The Graduate Center is proud to call it home. We're also proud to offer a unique master's degree in biography and memoir that leverages the creativity and expertise of the Leon Levy Center affiliates, the sense of community that the center creates, and the visibility and prestige the center provides to biographies and to biographers. Tonight's conversation is especially timely as it comes on the verge of the 50th anniversary of the death of Pablo Picasso, an artist whom I think we may know a lot about. He's the subject of Annie Cohen-Solal's illuminating biography, who will disabuse us of the notion. Annie paints Picasso as an outsider, shunned by the country he embraced. She illuminates not just the life of the man, but the politics and the intellectual life of 20th century France. Her book demonstrates why biography is both powerful and vital. Annie will be interviewed by Blair Asbury Brooks, who is a Graduate Center PhD candidate and a recipient of a Leon Levy Center Biography Fellowship. To say more about our speakers, I'm pleased to introduce Thad Ziolkowski, memoirist, poet, essayist, and novelist, and Associate Director of the Leon Levy Center.
Thank you, President Garrell. Welcome, everybody. I'd also like to thank the co-sponsor of tonight's event, Karen Sander, and of Public Programs, along with Jimmy Koch and Tim Ellis. And as always, our gratitude to Shelby White for her steadfast support of all we do here at the Biography Center. There is a strong and ultimately justifiable tendency to see art as above and apart from politics. Even expressly political art is subject to this dynamic. The greater the art, the freer it is from the gravitational pull of time, of history. Yet to recontextualize an artist in the nitty-gritty of history can, in the right hands, deepen appreciation of the full significance and singularity of their achievement. The right hands in this case are those of Annie Cohen-Solal, whose prodigious, years-long archival research and sleuthing have culminated in Picasso the Foreigner, a book that restores startling new life, contingency, and vulnerability to an artist who had joined the frieze of transhistorical greatness. As President Garrell said, Annie Cohen-Solal is Distinguished Professor at Bocconi University in Milan. She has served as the cultural counselor to the French Embassy in the United States, and her books include biographies of Sartre, Leo Castelli, and Mark Rothko, all of which have been widely translated. Picasso the Foreigner was awarded the 2021 Prix Femina essay. In 2021, an exhibition curated by Cohen-Solal and based on the research for this book appeared in Paris at the Museum of History of Immigration in partnership with the National Picasso Museum. She will be discussing Picasso with Blair Asbury Brooks, a PhD candidate in art history, whose dissertation, Heinz Berggruen, Dealing and Collecting Modern Art in the Shadow of World War II, is a comprehensive study of the life and career of the German-born dealer-collector. Following this conversation, Blair will open the floor to Q&A at the mics on the sides in those aisles, and following the Q&A, Annie Cohen-Solal will be signing books in the lobby. Please welcome Annie Cohen-Solal and Blair Asbury Brooks.
Thank you, Thad. Just a few quick words about the Leon Levy Center before we begin. And this is something I've shared with Shelby White, the center's founder. When I submitted my dissertation proposal, To my department's executive committee, there were, shall we say, I didn't get a standing ovation. They thought it was too biographical. And it's thanks to the unerring support of my advisor, Emily Braun, as well as the example and the work of the center, that I was able to push it through. It only took 3 times. The point being that in addition to their public programming and fellowships, which provide very necessary support, the center has affected in a good way the kind of work that can happen in the first place. So, thank you for being here, Annie. So let's begin with Claire Massoud, who wrote her very positive review of the book in Harper's by stating that Picasso is to art as Kleenex is to tissues. So it's an understatement to say that Picasso is a real well-trod subject. But in this book, you trace a specific aspect of his biography, his status as a foreigner in France. What were the origins of this project, which I've heard you describe as an investigation?
It all happened as an accident. I was attending the opening of the Museum of Immigration in Paris. It was the 15th of December 2015. And that place is a horrible place in France. It's called the Palais des Colonies. It was built for an exhibition of the colonial empire in 1931. Disgusting. You see black people naked. And it's basically the most horrific image of French colonial empire. This place, you have to go. You have to go. Oh, I'm telling you all, you have to go. It was the celebration of the worst of France. Now, 1931, it was boycotted both by Surrealists and Picasso at the time, 1931. Now, a certain president called Monsieur Sarkozy wanted to turn it into le Musée de l'Histoire de France. There was a kind of riot against him. In the end, it became the Musée de l'Histoire de l'Immigration. This is typical France. France can do worst and the best. So just as, the Impressionist painters were not allowed by the academicians, and then suddenly there was a Salon des Refusés where they appealed to the prince and they were able to exhibit. Now here, the same thing, this horrible, huge place, Palais de la Porte Dorée, turned into the Musée de l'Histoire de l'Immigration. And the date it was inaugurated. The president of the Conseil Scientifique, Benjamin Stora, who's a scholar of Algerian immigration, said, we will talk about people who never could become French in this country, such as Picasso. I heard that on the radio in the morning. And I knew, as a few people knew, that there had been a file where Picasso had applied for naturalization, which never happened. Okay, so that stayed in the part of my ear. And on the evening, at the opening of this inauguration, came Laurent Lebon, the new director of the Musée Picasso in Paris. He had been named a few weeks before. So I told Laurent Lebon, do you know that this morning Benjamin Stora spoke about Picasso? And he says, I don't know Benjamin Stora. Then I went to Benjamin Stora. I said, do you know that Laurent Lebon is here? I said, I don't know Laurent Lebon. So basically you have these two worlds completely entrenched from each other, the world of social historians who deal with immigration, and the world of art historians who deal with art. Art, beautiful art floating in the clouds and has nothing to do with history. So what I did was I bridged the two of them. So my whole book happened that in terms of a dinner, where we invited them for dinner, and I introduced them, and it was decided a few weeks later that I would curate a show called Picasso, a Foreigner in the City. So that's how all started. But to tell you the whole truth, I am much too shy. I was much too shy to decide on my own to start a research on Picasso. It was the same thing with Sartre. It was a giant. So how do you approach a giant? You are forced by the circumstances, So here I started do my research as usual, asking myself, my approach is very much influenced by American sociology. I am not an art historian. I am a trained sociologist, trained by American sociology, a character that I adore, with whom I worked, called Irving Goffman. Okay? So Irving Goffman taught me that microsociology is a key to understand the approach of anyone. And I'm very interested by intercultural relations. How does a foreigner feel in a country where he's completely rejected? How does someone feel without speaking a language in a new city? So that's how I approached that research. How did Picasso, this brash young kid, who at age 18 had a painting in the Universal Exhibition in Paris, and who knew that he was a genius at age 14, you know how, Blair, you know how? Because he went to the Prado, and he copied a portrait of Philip IV by Velázquez. And his portrait, which you can all have a look at, it is in the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, is more beautiful than the original. So that day he knew he could do better than Velázquez. So this young, brash kid whose father is professor of painting in Barcelona and so arrives in Paris and finds himself in a country which I know very well, and that might also be the reason why I felt very in tune to identify with Picasso, because my own personal story, and I never put myself in the books, but in this case, I tell about my anger, I tell about my surprise, I tell about, and it's the very first time it happened to me. Why? Because I experienced that story on myself, but much later on, I was 14 years old from Algeria, and I had been a very good student in Algiers. I was kind of the best, and talk and publicize things and so on. I arrived in Paris, and here I was designated by the professor of history. I was a foreigner. I couldn't do the family tree as usual, as the others. I didn't have a good family tree because I didn't belong. I did not belong. Yeah, the expression. I did not belong because I came from a family whose ancestors were not aristocrats, you know, and so on and so forth. So this is true. I mean, 1962, when I arrived from Algiers, I had this terrible slap in the face. You don't belong. So that is the core of my trauma and the origin of my research. All my research has been going around people who have experienced that. So I don't. Oops, sorry. I never say it publicly. I mean, to you, I say it, because you asked me when we wrote to each other. And in my book, I really put myself in the shoes of Picasso. What did he feel? How did he go? So the first thing I went into is archival research, and I asked the new director of the Picasso Museum, who still has 200,000 items. Can you imagine? The whole Picasso is someone who never threw away anything, not even a ticket to the circus. He had 300 of them. He never threw away anything. So basically, it's a formidable source of information. And the first thing I asked, as I did in my previous books, is, are there letters to the family? Because I wanted to know the first categorization of France. What did he write about? What did he say? What did he draw? What did he perceive? And I insisted because, you know, it was a little difficult, but when I want something, I get it. Yeah, that's a key. I mean, if there are young students here, if you need it, if you need something, you have to get it. You have to find a way. And I know that it's very American, because in France, there are a lot of administrative problems. Anyway, a few days later, it was, I remember, the 11th of January 2017, the guy told me, here are the letters of Maria. Maria was Picasso's mother, and there were 4 huge boxes of archives. Inside, there were envelopes. Inside, there were other envelopes stamped by Ministry of Culture, which was done at the time of Picasso's succession, so between 1973 and 1985. And those envelopes had been opened by Picasso, but by nobody else before me. So I was in front of 4,000 letters, the letters from his mother, who wrote to him 4 letters a week for 40 years, over 40 years. She stopped when she passed away and he was 60. And in each letter, she wrote, Querido hijo Pablo, at the beginning, my dear son Pablo, and at the end she wrote, recibe tantos besos de la tua madre que tanto, tanto te quiere y nunca te olvida. Receive many kisses from your mother who loves you more than anything else and will never forget you. Every single time, she assured him. And I had the feeling, because Sartre was similar, that behind each genius, there's an over-loving mother. Some of you, if you have a Jewish mother here, you created, you can create genius, I'm telling you. But the whole thing is that it was extraordinary to get into the intimacy of that guy that, that I didn't dare approaching, you see? And all of a sudden, I was into the family, and I read the Spanish, and I was deciphering the handwriting, and the mother, goes from the left border of the page to the right border of the page, and she doesn't leave one millimeter, and sometimes she writes on her own handwriting. It's like a palimpsest.
Vertically,
yes, exactly.
Horizontally.
Exactly. So you can see that she's a powerful person. Somebody asked me just at the cocktail before, why didn't he have a Spanish girlfriend, a Spanish woman in his life first? And the most important Spanish woman in his life is his mother. That's the whole thing. Did I speak too long? Did I answer your question? I don't know. Did I answer your question, or did I answer?
You've answered most of them.
Oh, okay. So let's have a Q&A. Okay. I'm sorry.
Let's backtrack a little bit.
Okay. You're the boss.
No, I'm not. So, in contrast to the triumphant later years that I think we're all familiar with, his early years were spent in often dire circumstances in Paris. And you show that he was monitored by French police. And you've made some discoveries there about her surveillance. What will you tell us about that surveillance?
Yes. So I decided to, investigation. You said investigation. I decided to go where the action was, where his file was, the police archives, which is au Pré Saint-Gervais. It's not exactly a nice neighborhood of Paris, but it's worth traveling to. Go. You have a few addresses now. If somebody wants to travel to Paris, I give you a few addresses. Right? The Musée National de l'Histoire de l'Immigration et les archives de la police. So there, it was still possible to see the file, normal file, the paper. Now it's only on computer. But
the slide, please.
Yes, we're going to see So I must say that I was shocked. I was shocked to see the number of pages, the number of requests, the number of visits. We want to see the other one also. The two together, can we see? The number of requests he had to do, the number of trips to the police, the number of fingerprints. I had no idea that the number of pictures where he looked like a criminal, that, it was another human being. You're talking about Picasso being overwhelming as a personality in the art world, but here, that was not the overwhelming artist. That was just a foreigner, a pariah, somebody who was disturbing this image of French national purity. And I couldn't put the two together. When I got out of the police archives, I wanted to vomit. I took the subway back, and I looked at I was just destroyed. And I looked at the names of the stations, and mechanically, and I saw the last station on the line was called Bobigny Pablo Picasso. I mean, what? So basically, a guy whose name is on, Jeff Kennedy was named on the subway, is a guy who started like that. So my anger, was so strong that day that I wrote this little text, which is at the beginning of the book, and I never changed it. So that's why the book is also a kind of testimony to, it's a tribute to the other one, the one who, Picasso was never persecuted. Don't get me wrong. He was not persecuted. He lived in France, but he was not welcomed and he was treated as another one, as a foreigner, by two institutions which were very powerful in France at the time. One is the Police des Étrangers, which was the most sophisticated police in the world, and that all policemen from all over the world went to admire, and who started a file against him in June 1901, the second time he comes to Paris, and because he has a show, it's very prestigious at age 19, and he and a critic, Gustave Coquio, writes a very positive review of Picasso's show, but the police commissioner, the police officer, who is in Montmartre, where Picasso lives, sees the name of Pablo Ruiz Picasso, on whom he has already, informants had written about him. Why? Because when you go to a foreign country, think about it for yourself. Where do you go when you don't know the language? You go where your buddies are, you go where your family is, you go where you know people. So where did he go? To the place where his friends, the Catalans, who escorted him 4 times, was Montmartre. And Montmartre was the ghetto of the Catalan anarchists who had been fleeing Spain because of the attacks. So they had been in Paris for 20 years, and they were targeted by the police. And the police had informants sit in cafes and write about the Allée Avenue of the people. So also France, it was a country with a lot of social tensions. The Dreyfus case was just happened, and a French president had been killed by an Italian anarchist. So the anarchists were very much, in the press. So, but Picasso had no other way but to go with his friends and to arrive in an anarchist neighborhood. So they gave him the key to Paris, but by the same token, they gave him the trap to Paris, because living there, he was filed by the police. And immediately, there's a file against him, which says, because he's painting beggars, because he comes back at night late, because he doesn't speak French, because he gets foreign newspapers in the press, because he lives with an anarchist, he must be considered an anarchist. So Picasso, the very first thing that the French police says is he's a danger for the security of the state. This is what happens. He doesn't know about it. But what I want to show you is something very interesting. So when you have, I want to see the other picture first. Can you show it? No. What? Perfect. This one. Okay. This is a representation by him of him and his Catalan buddies in Paris. What I love about this thing is that it's a painting which belongs to the Barnes Foundation and which is never visible. It's in storage, and I couldn't get it for my show, but I hope one day I'll get it. So you see this bunch of guys. You see in the back, to the right, the Moulin de Montmartre, a mill. So it's basically un terrain vague. That's, so he really settles them in the neighborhood, which is this bad neighborhood, where the crimes took place, people had guns, and just like in Texas here, right? Anyway, so here he portrays a group of Catalans. They are not appealing. They are not appealing. One is tall, one is small, they're ugly, they look bizarre. And he himself is the second to the right, okay, starting. And he hides himself with a scarf, his face with a scarf. And my question was, why does he hide his face with a scarf, My answer comes from somebody I worked on, which is Jean-Paul Sartre, who talks about the gaze of the other one. And Sartre described the gaze of the other one. He says it transforms you into someone that you are not because it's for the other one. And he says the gaze of the other one is like a gun pointed at me. I don't know if you have any story in your head, but I had a story, meeting with my first publisher, who, when I went out of this interaction, I felt terrible. I felt terrible. And I knew that he looked at me in a certain way, which was not a nice way. This guy was called Bernard-Henri Lévy, but that's a parenthesis. But I'll tell you more if you need to. But I felt bad about myself. And you feel that the gaze of the other one turns you into someone yet you are not. And here, Picasso represents himself and his friends in the gaze of the police. You know, he is able to see that he doesn't look good, you see? So I think it's extremely interesting at age 18 to be able to see that he is not welcomed, and they look bizarre, and they look like criminals, even if he knows he's not. So this is a very interesting for me. It represents xenophobia. You know, it doesn't represent him. It represents the feeling and the rejection of xenophobia. And the second picture, if I may, sir, voilà. Okay, this is an unpublished letter that I'm delighted to show you in prima, una grande prima, as you see in Italian. So it's a letter that belongs to the family archives that has never been shown before, and was given to me. And it's the letter that Picasso writes to his parents at exactly the same time, just when the police file is being written against him. So when the police people see him as a danger for the state, that's how he sees himself and represents himself to his parents. And here he writes, a kind of adorable thing. Dear parents, don't I look good with this new costume? Don't I look good with my socks? I'm very happy to have a nice studio. The light comes from the north. I've done already 20 paintings, you know. So it is him describing himself for his family, you see? So that's why I wanted to show one after the other one, the way the police people are looking at him and the way he's looking at himself for his family. So just to show that that's where my work as a biographer stands. Do you understand? Yes. Is it a little too...
No, it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, at the same time that he also kept within largely a circle of foreigners themselves, but that changed over time, and he navigated between circles of foreigners and then very well-connected French people, and he navigated that.
Yes. We can say that Picasso enters into Paris through different friendships. So the first are the Catalans, and then very quickly he's going to distantiate himself from them. He meets poets, Max Jacob, and then Guillaume Apollinaire. Guillaume Apollinaire is extremely important because he's much more daring than Picasso. He knows the city of Paris. He's a polyglot. He traveled all over Europe, and he gives Picasso this power. He empowers him, basically. So that's going to be the year 1905. Then there are, but Apollinaire is an apatride, so he has no passport. And him and Picasso, they really share that feeling of being, you know, on the edge of society and being on the verge of being expelled, you know. So that, and then he meets with the Stein family. I know you don't pronounce it this way. Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein.
Yeah, I can. Okay, so he meets with them, and who are these first collectors, and actually when he becomes the leader of Cubism, so during the years, I'm sorry?
No, ignore it.
When the years 1907 to 1914, when he manages to overcome his difficulties to step into, you know, the art world, then what he does is extremely interesting, because the masterwork of this period is called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and it belongs to MoMA. It arrived in 1939. It was given to the French, to the Louvre, but the Louvre rejected it, so it came to the United States. But the work that Picasso was doing in his studio in Montmartre was not understood by many people. Nevertheless, Picasso was influenced because he was a predator, as all creators are predators. He understood and had antennas, everything which was going on at that very specific historical period of time in old Europe, because it was a time that Einstein created relativity, that Bergson started to work on time in philosophy, that Apollinaire was writing about all the countries in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that aviation was starting, that, the cinema was created. So Picasso was interested in everything. He had this extraordinary, visual intelligence, visual memory, but also curiosity. So at the time that old Europe was being destroyed, he himself was like Hamlet at the border of the precipice. And he was able to understand and read and know and learn from all those different, spectrum of changes. And that's how Cubism was created. And that's when, the representation, traditional representation was being distorted through the help of his friend Georges Braque, who was himself a trained craftsman, So who was able to understand that extraordinary revolution that Picasso brought into the art world at the time, exclusively, except for one example, exclusively expatriates like him. The first one of them being Daniel Henri Kainweiler, who's a young German banker who arrives in Paris at age 22 and who immediately sees that what Picasso is doing has nothing to do with taste, to do with truth. And Kainweiler is around him. He becomes his dealer. He understands what he does. He gets reviewers, and he manages to find a market, it's one of the second time of internationalization, globalization in economy, to sell his works in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in the Russian Empire, in the German Empire, in the United States. It becomes a real market. And in 1914, Picasso becomes really rich. So the other people around Kainweiler are the critics, Karl Einstein, the other galleries called Wilhelm Uhde. You have a great scholar born in Prague who studied in Vienna called Vincent Kramach. So all that has been studied. Has been studied by the Leonard Lauder Center at the Met, and I want to pay a tribute to Leonard Lauder, who was the first one who ever heard my story and who challenged me. He said, go ahead, I completely believe in what you're doing. And he opened this fabulous center where that period is being the core of the research. But so Picasso was an expatriate living with expatriates who understood what he was doing. As for the French, why should you ask me why are not the French understanding what he does? Because, my dear Blair, French art historians were trained to worship exclusively le bon goût français, French good taste, quotation marks, coming from Louis XIV, harmony, tradition, equilibrium, nothing else. And as you know, the Academy was locking outside everything which had to do with any avant-garde. Okay? So Picasso on one side, there's a police who considered him as a foreigner and a threat. On the other side, the Académie des Beaux-Arts, who does not include, revolutions, okay, aesthetical revolution. But the crowd of Germans who are around him and who are trained by this extraordinary school of art, the golden age of art history in Germany, they were people trained in economy, in linguistics, in anthropology, it's das kommt nicht von ungefähr that it's not by accident that Germany was able to have a school like the Bauhaus, which France was never able to have. But anyway, I'm too long. No?
I'm just checking the time.
Okay, taking that. Yeah, I'm finished?
I think we're fine.
Are we finished?
No, we're fine.
We're fine.
We're fine.
Okay, go ahead.
We still have time.
You have more questions for me?
Yes. So, getting back to the French,
establishment.
The establishment. And I didn't put this in my questions to you, but André Lavelle. He, as you may know, was he spearheaded the Peau de l'Ours, the Skin of the Bear, the consortium of investors who purchased a number of works. by Picasso. They were predetermined to be sold. Years later, they did astonishingly well. It essentially cemented the market for some of these artists who had not been sold publicly. So, very savvy businessman, connoisseur. Also very much in the establishment in France. And at the moment of World War I, when Kahnweiler, our German national, who was Picasso's dealer, his stock was sequestered. Louvel, he kept coming back in your book, and he played a protector role over the years. So very adventurous in the market, but then a protector.
So that, yeah, I get back to the question where you asked me how Picasso navigated between the other expatriates and the French establishment. So André Louvel is a very interesting figure in France. Actually, I tracked down his genealogy, and he comes from a Jewish family converted to Catholicism. And it might give him some kind of sensitivity to, to otherness. And André Louvel was a bourgeois, a lawyer, who with his friends, 20-year-old, 30-year-old bankers, decided to support young artists their age and to buy, and in the end, to sell the collection. And when they would sell the collection, they would give 20% to each artist of the profit they would do. So when he bought a beautiful painting of Picasso, which is at the National Gallery of Art, on which I spoke last Friday, called Les Saltimbanques, a fabulous piece. When he bought it in 1908 for 1,000 francs, and he sold it in 1914 for 11,000 francs. And then he sent by porter, by driver, private, Picasso a check of 4,000 francs, which was so elegant, and so normal. And so this André Louvel, and then in December 1914, because this war between France and Germany is something which is a very important element in Picasso's biography. 1871, France loses the war against Germany, and so there's this kind of terrible rivalry of France and Germany, where Germany is considered as the utmost rival, and that would go on until 1914, when the war starts again between these two powers. But the French have this hostility, this hysteria against Germany, and in December 1914, all German citizens in France are being treated as Boche, which is a horrible word, which means German in slang, and the enemy. So Kahnweiler, the dealer of Picasso, is being confiscated his stock, and among his stock are 700 works of Picasso, which was, raving about creating and papier collé with Braque and more and more and more. It was a festival of creativity. And all of a sudden, that work is taken by the police and disappears for 10 years, and then it's being sold in terrible conditions. And I let Veran Tasso, who sits here, tell it in her PhD and in her future exhibition, I hope. It's a story which has to be told. And Picasso feels amputated by his work, and then he reestablishes himself differently. And I adore art historians. I was fed by their catalogs and their shows. But this is something that I think some missed, because they tried to explain the different aesthetical movements that Picasso adopted after this ordeal of World War I, in between, Cubism, classic, Cubism, Surrealism. I don't think in those terms. I think that Picasso was so threatened by what had happened that he tried to find niches where to work. And my analysis of the situation of Picasso between 1919 and 1939 is much more social analysis, He worked with Diaghilev for the Ballet Russe because Diaghilev was an internationalist, because Diaghilev knew what he had done, because Diaghilev had seen Picasso's work in Moscow, at Chukin, in Leningrad, at Morozov. And then he worked with Étienne de Beaumont, who was an aristocrat who had a niche where they became mentors for artists in Paris. So Picasso avoided French state by working in these niches with people, and that we will show in the exhibition. There would be an exhibition at Gagosian Gallery, 21st Street, opening the 10th of November. Please come, and we will have pieces from that period. Why does Picasso become a stage designer? Because he's given work by those people, So simply because of his status as a foreigner. And then he works with the surrealists who just absolutely adore him, the young surrealists like Dali, Miro, and so on. And then it's a time of the Civil War, and he becomes immediately committed to the cause of the Republicans with Guernica and so on. Mm-hmm. I think we finished, no?
No.
How much?
We have a few more minutes.
A few more minutes.
I have a few more questions.
Okay.
So one of the major moments in your book is April 3rd, 1940, when Picasso made his first and only application for naturalization to France. Why that moment, and why was his application rejected?
Okay. April 3rd, 1940, there's a beautiful signature of Picasso, one of the most beautiful of his signatures. It's in the book. It's a signature, I think it's more beautiful than in any painting. It's a signature which says, it's going to be yes. And the signature is at the bottom of a letter where he requires from the Minister of Justice to become French. So he's been in France for 40 years. There's been a law in 1927 where anybody who was a foreigner after 3 years in France could become French. But Picasso didn't apply. He was not interested. He didn't ask. What happens at that time when he's so confident that he can become French? He was very famous in the United States.
Let's actually go to the next two slides, if we may.
Yeah, yes, this one. That's a show which takes place at MoMA, 1939. Picasso, 40 years of his art, where Alfred Barr is giving him, after 4 more shows before, but Picasso becomes the cardinal force of all the movements, art movements, for the last 40 years. So Picasso, why does Picasso apply for naturalization just at that time? Because he has been made director of the Prado honorifically in Spain. Because his nephews are Republicans and come as refugees with him. Because in 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks, he was able to transcend the horror of Guernica, these bombs thrown by German Nazi planes, as well as Spanish Franquist planes, on a small city in the Basque country, a sunny day of a market. So it was the first civil bombing in history. Now, there are many of them. But at the time, it was not very well known, not very much done, just terrible. And Picasso, we see it in his archives. He has a piece of paper with photos from the newspapers. And within 3 weeks, he was commissioned to do a piece for the Spanish Pavilion at the Universal Exhibition in Paris, 1937, paid by the Spanish government. So he had contemplated the idea of doing the painter and his model. We have many options, but immediately he transcends the horror of the moment, and he produces in his studio in Paris this huge fresco that will become Guernica with the help of Dora Maar. Dora Maar is his friend at the time. She's a very well-known surrealist photographer whose pictures are in the MoMA collection already. And I claim that it's a co-construction, Guernica, between them two, you have a lot of evidence of the influence of surrealist photography in the piece. And Guernica is going to become, today, it's the most famous work of art today. When you ask people to tell which you already know, it's Guernica. So basically, Picasso is able to do that. Now, the fact is that what happens to this piece, it travels the Western world in different museums in order to raise money for Spanish Republicans. Picasso never bragged about it, but he had a little notebook in which he was gathering money, and he was sending money to Spanish Republicans. He did it for more than 10 years. So that's one of the things that he didn't explain. He didn't talk about his being a foreigner in France. Nobody knew about it. He didn't tell that he was gathering money for the Republicans. Nevertheless, what he knew is that he was an Entartete artist in Germany, degenerate artist, and his works were burnt in Munich. He knew that he was persona non grata in Spain, and he knew that his friend Federico Garcia Lorca had been killed as expiatory victim by the Frankists, and he knew that he was the next one. Picasso was so well known at the time in the world that he was the next one. And then he knew that the Nazis were coming to France. So what did he do? He filed for naturalization. Did he want to become French? No, I don't think so. I think that he wanted to be protected. That's my opinion. And when later on he's been given a French naturalization by General de Gaulle, he refuses. When later on he's being given a Legion of Honor, bestowed a Legion of Honor by Malraux, Minister of Culture, he refuses. He sends Malraux a note saying, Legion of Honor for artists without a collector, for writers without a publisher, finished. So this is very clear that at this moment, Picasso thinks that he is threatened and he wants to be protected. He won't be protected because there's a horrible guy at the police who refuses, on the basis of the first police file from 1901, to give Picasso this naturalization. So that's one of the things which brought my anger to another level, another climax, and that I let go in the book because I wanted to know who was this guy? Who is the signature behind that? The signature, who was the guy who said to Picasso, you're not allowed to become... And I tracked down the guy, I tracked down the signature. You know, it's a work, collective work. This book is full of different disciplines, you know, history of police, history of immigration, art history, sociology, microsociology. I mean, you have no idea how many people I consulted, and I believe that intelligence is collective. So I had many colleagues who were wonderful to help me, and this, you know, I did the book, but then I did the show, and after the show I did a catalog, and I noticed how much Picasso is a fabulous object for social sciences. So I asked anthropologists, sociologists, geographers, global historians, all of them, to write on Picasso, and people were fascinated. So I have a whole range of texts which are wonderful about that trajectory, which is unique in a way. So it's too long.
No, ça va. May we just go to the last slide quickly, and then may we go to the first one with the cover of the book, because that will be my final question before we open it up.
So the last one, yeah. This is where Picasso is at the time, you know? This is the file, his file, police file. In the back, there were 2 million files, so that is the room 205, Escalier F, at the Palais, Boulevard du Palais, and the people in front are the informants. You know, the people who are writing notes about the foreigners in Paris. So this Picasso file, the one which I could discover, was among those. And in the summer of 1940, the files of the famous foreigners, the VIP foreigners, including Picasso, were stolen by the Nazis, put on a barge, arrived in Berlin, stayed in Berlin 1945. In 1945, the Russians took these files of VIP foreigners, including Picasso's file, put them to Moscow, and in the year 2000, the French got back the files. So the file I looked at was full of stamps in German, in Russian, so it's a whole odyssey, which is incredibly interesting, I think. Don't you think?
I do. May we go back to the first slide with the cover of the book, and that will be my final question. And this is a photograph by Dora Maar, and this loops into my final question, which I figured if I didn't ask, someone in the audience would, so we're asking it. Well, to start with, why this specific image for this specific investigation? But then the other question, which I anticipated, was, well, you've given us a comprehensive and new perspective on Picasso as a foreigner, and it's a bit outside of the scope of your book, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on another very fraught perspective, which is increasingly entered the public consciousness, and that's Picasso's relationship to women.
Okay. So why this particular image? I was asked by my publisher, who's in the room now and whom I thank so much for helping me. He asked me to send a few images for the cover. So I sent a few images, including this one, because I think it was an interesting one in which the beginning of the relationship between Picasso and Dora Maar takes the form of Picasso being a model for Dora Maar. So he uses women as models, but I think it's the first time that in his life that another artist is taking him as a model. So she just takes a portrait of him and then adds some color, maybe with anger, we don't know. We're able to project. But anyway, this is very interesting. I love this picture and I love the cover. Do you like the cover? Do you like the cover?
I do.
Yeah, I like the cover. I like the cover. So it gives also, there's an interaction taking place in here. It's not flat. It's something where you feel something is happening. Now, Picasso and women. Yeah, it's a big story. Okay, so there have been great biographies of Picasso. One of them is John Richardson. One of them is Pierre Dex. And Pierre Dex had one of the biographies of Picasso done by chapters. Eva, Fernand, Olga. Okay, first of all, I am less interested by women than they are, okay? First of all. Second thing, I don't call women by their first name. I call women by their full name. It's not Olga. It's Olga Koklova. It's not Marie-Thérèse, it's Marie-Thérèse Walter. Okay, first of all, because I'm a woman and because I think that women have to be respected. They're not objects. Okay, first of all, let's be very clear. I'm a feminist. Okay, first thing. Second thing, I think that Picasso's relationship with women needs data. Okay, so as long as I don't have the data, I don't express myself. So if somebody wants to give me the data about Picasso mistreating women, I'm happy to discuss, but for the time being, I don't have the right data, about that, first thing. Last thing, I am extremely interested in the relationship of Picasso with women of all kinds. Picasso had a fabulous relationship with somebody called Gertrude Stein, as you say, Stein, okay.
Stein.
So once he wrote to her a letter. On the cover of the envelope, he wrote, Mademoiselle Gertrude Stein, homme de lettres. To Miss Gertrude Stein, man of letters. Okay. And while he was doing the portrait of Gertrude Stein, and he was, sitting next to her, genou contre genou, knee against knee, they had 90 sittings. He was going from Montmartre to Montparnasse, and 90 sitting. At the time he was creating this fabulous portrait, which is at the Met, she was writing the history of Americans, her own history, which is a very interesting history of German Jews as well, living not far away from Kainweiler, not far away from Stiglitz. Interesting. Anyway, so both of them were producing at the same time. There was a kind of extremely interesting Cubist production among them. So they worked like buddies. They worked like, and where sex was not important, in which also you could see that Picasso was sensitive to gender fluidity, which is a terminology which didn't exist then. The same thing happened between Picasso and Marie Cutoli, who made fabulous tapestries out of his things, which you can see at the Barnes Foundation and everywhere. He had a fabulous relationship with Hélène Parmelin, who was a woman in the Communist Party, like him, extremely distantiated from the traditional opinion, from the Moscow, and a critical communist. She has 760 letters to Picasso in the files. And then the last one being Suzanne Ramier. He's a woman when Picasso, in the end, in 1955, he leaves Paris for Valoris, for the south of France. He decides never to return to Paris. He lives with a craftsman. He becomes a ceramist. He chooses south against north, region against the capital, craftsmen against the establishment, and local people against the Académie des Beaux-Arts. And he creates his fame from the place where he has always belonged, which is the Mediterranean, made of multiple cultures. That's where he belongs. And the person who taught him ceramics is called Suzanne Ramier. So he started with her ceramics in the village of Valoris, which you have to go to. It's beautiful, another address. And he became a revolutionary in ceramics. He became the best, absolutely. And he was creating, negotiating in his head the way he lived the time with the ceramists of antique Greece and antique Rome. So I also have someone in my catalog, François Hartog, who's a scholar of antique Greece, dealing with Picasso and time, the times of Picasso, how Picasso dealt with time. So those women, Picasso had with them fabulous interactions that I'm much more interested in than the gossips we could hear recently. Is it enough?
Wait. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to the Leon Levy Center for Biography, the Graduate Center's public programs, and of course to Shelby White for her support.